Welcome to session 7, the last one in my All About Bees Swarming and Swarm Control video collection. Today I'll be looking at swarming triggers and the other factors that can influence swarming. I will explain to you why you should carry out 7-day inspections and will then give you some practical tips and useful manipulations that will help you take control of your bees when they decide to swarm. If you are enjoying these videos, please click the like and subscribe buttons below, especially if you don't want to miss out on any new video releases, and I also welcome any comments and questions you may have. There have been many theories over the years as to why bees swarm, with several individuals claiming to have discovered the one swarming trigger, and I'll briefly cover them now. Ferdinand Gerstang's brood food theory was popular in the late 1800s and 1900s. His theory was an excess of brood food production leads to swarming, this being due to an excess of young bees who produce brood food and so led to queen raising and the production of drones to consume the brood food. His flawed assumption that all workers become nurse bees and hence produce copious amounts of brood food is now accepted as incorrect. A different view of swarming as a response to congestion was put forward in the 1920s by an American, George Demuth. Demuth reached a broad audience with authority since he worked for the US Department of Agriculture and was responsible for much of their published advice to beekeepers at the time. His theory was that crowding of bees in the hive leads to swarming, and although there is strong observational evidence to support this theory, it fails to explain observed behaviour in a number of common situations. For example, strong colonies with excess of comb still swarm despite lack of apparent crowding, and induced congestion does not always lead to swarming. Colin Butler's theory in the 1960s was that insufficient distribution of queen substance leads to swarming, and again, although there is strong observational evidence to support this, colonies headed by a young queen are unlikely to swarm, and swarming colonies still exist despite vigorous queen being present. Other theories include the view that a surplus of wax makers lead to swarming, so if you replace drone comb with foundation, it will reduce swarming. The theory that lack of shade and ventilation encourages swarming was popular in the late 1800s as well, but was really considered an example or byproduct of crowding and not a trigger in itself. And there is no evidence to support the theory that colonies that are more heavily manipulated are more prone to swarming. And in fact, all of these theories put forward as a swarming trigger are all flawed. You do get swarmy strains of bees, that's for sure, and you can breed a more non-swarmy bee. But swarming is a complex process, and there is no single trigger. Winston, in Biology of the Honeybee, suggests a combination of colony size, brood nest congestion, reduced transmission of queen substance, and resource abundance. So, what strains of bees are more swarmy than others? Well, in my experience, I always found the local black strains of bee the most swarmy, often throwing a prime swarm and then cast after cast. I have quite a lot of experience with buckfast type bees, and I would say that they are the least swarmy. On average, out of 100 buckfast type double brood box colonies that I would take to the rape, maybe 20 of them would try and swarm. Of course, that was not just the strain of bee, but the management practices I adopted as well, of which I will cover in another video. Other influences are the time of year. There are more swarms in mid-spring, the weather, they can swarm like crazy in a really hot spell, nectar flows. In my opinion, as long as you give them space to store the nectar and honey, they swarm after the nectar flow has ended. And the bee population, a congested brood box and congested supers can influence swarming. And finally, lack of space for the queen to lay and for the bees to hang the nectar in order to ripen it. These can all influence swarming, but as we said, it's a complex subject. So it's complicated, that's for sure. To have the chance with swarming, you need to understand the life history of honeybees, learn swarming theory, understand what is going on in the hive, use prevention and control methods at appropriate times, and practice the methods and manipulations until they become easier for you. The bottom line is this: you need to be in control, not the bees. Let's start with looking at the development timeline of the egg, as you really need to understand this if you wish to become competent in swarm control. A worker bee takes 21 days from egg laying to emerging from the cell. A drone takes 24 and a queen takes 16 days. A queen cell is sealed on day 8 and the queen will emerge from her cell on day 16, unless the bees keep her imprisoned in the cell, of course. So why do I recommend you carry out 7-day inspections? Well, remember that the queen cell is sealed at day 8 and it is then that the swarm generally leaves with the old queen. If there are no queen cells present at an inspection, it will be 8 days before a swarm issues. So if you carry out hive inspections every 7 days, you will be able to deal with any unsealed queen cells, won't you? So carry out inspections every 7 days, but only up to the day you see unsealed queen cells. When I was new to this beekeeping lark, I made the mistake of thinking if I knocked down the unsealed queen cells, it would be another 8 days before the bees would swarm. But that was a serious error that lost me lots of swarms. Fertilized eggs will either become a worker bee or a queen, and this is mainly due to the diet the bees feed the larvae. They can change the diet of a 5-day-old larva, which is 3 days as an egg and 2 days as a larva, originally destined to become a worker, and make it into a queen. As well as this being absolutely amazing, it means that the swarm can issue from your hive 3 or 4 days after you've destroyed all the unsealed queen cells. Remember that the queen cell is sealed on day 8, and that is generally when the swarm leaves. And by changing the diet of the 5-day-old larva, it will become a queen. They will seal the cell 3 days later and the swarm will be gone before you know it. However, bees cannot make a 7-day larva into a queen. That would be 3 days as an egg, 4 days as a larva, as the larva at this stage is too far developed and it is destined to become a worker bee. So, during swarm control methods, when you destroy unsealed queen cells and leave one unsealed queen cell in the hive, as in the nucleus method, you need to go back in and destroy any new queen cells after 7 days. This is very important. It must be 7 days, even if it is raining. Use a brolly over the bees, not over yourself of course. The bees will not be able to make any more queen cells because it's been 3 days as an egg and 4 days as a larva. That equals 7 days. Swarm management involves swarm prevention, what you do before the bees go into swarming mode, and swarm control, what you do when you discover unsealed queen cells. Prevention is proactive while control is reactive. Here are some swarm prevention tips. Try and minimize the combination of swarming triggers and other influences in your hive. To do this, provide plenty of room to prevent congestion in the brood chamber for your queen to lay eggs, especially when a decent spring honey flow starts. You may need to remove excess stores of honey from the brood chamber and replace these with frames of foundation. You also need to provide plenty of super space. Drawn comb if you have it for the bees to hang the nectar in to ripen it. That means when they're reducing its moisture content. When this has been done, they will move the honey, but they need the space sooner rather than later. Make sure the hives are properly ventilated, use an open mesh floor for example, and not placed in full sun. Replace older queens as early in the year as possible. You will need to keep hive records for this so you know how old the queen is in each hive. Some bee farmers I know who don't have the time to do proper inspections as they have hundreds of hives will introduce new current year queens to their hives in late spring, early summer, as it is unlikely that a colony with a new queen will swarm that year. If the odd one does, it won't matter to a bee farmer with 400 hives, will it? You can take a nuke out of a populous colony, as I explained previously. This used to work a treat for me. So, for swarm control, as we have said, you need to carry out regular inspections every 7 days until you see unsealed queen cells. Look out for congestion in the hive. An increase in drones. Don't forget your bees won't swarm unless drones are present. A reduction in laying with the queen looking slimmer than usual. You'll need good eyes for that one. And look out for polished queen cups. These things will give you an indication that the bees are near to starting swarm preparations. But when you do see unsealed queen cells, you know that they are now well on the path to swarming. Let's look at some poor swarm control techniques that won't work. Continually knocking down queen cells will frustrate the bees and will frustrate you. You will eventually miss a queen cell and they will swarm anyway. Now it's okay to destroy unsealed queen cells the first time you see them, and maybe add a super of foundation or a second brood box of drawn comb, just to see if the bees are really intent on swarming. Sometimes if you give them space, they will change their minds, but you need to check again after 2 days. If they are still making queen cells, you need to take action. If they are not, revert to your 7-day inspections. Clipping the queen's wings will not prevent swarming. The bees will still go through the sequence of events and the queen will leave or be pushed out with the swarm on day 8 when the queen cell is sealed. As she cannot fly, she will be lost on the ground somewhere, or she may even make it back into the hive. The swarm will also eventually return to the hive, even if they find it on the floor and cluster around her for a while. Clipping the queen's wings will merely give you some extra time between inspections. You can do 14-day inspections until you see unsealed queen cells, and then you can do 10-day inspections rather than the 7 days. And this is something that bee farmers do due to the high number of hives they have. I wouldn't recommend it to a hobby beekeeper with say a dozen hives, because you'll miss out on all the swarm adventures. Placing a queen excluder between the floor and the brood chamber won't prevent a swarm leaving the hive. The queen for sure will be trapped in the hive, so the swarm will cluster nearby but will eventually return to the hive. Inside the hive, in a few days' time, there will be virgin queens emerging and much fighting along with many more swarms. Virgin queens are slimmer and can often get through a queen excluder anyway, so eventually you will lose a swarm and you may even lose all your bees. Trapping the queen inside the hive will cause mayhem to your colony of bees, from which they also may not recover. You can use the same argument against caging the queen, as eventually virgins will emerge and you will lose a swarm anyway. Making splits, I hate that word with regard to beekeeping, it's an Americanism, otherwise known as simply dividing the hive into 2, won't stop a swarm. Sure, you may be lucky, but the likelihood is that the hive with the queen in will still swarm. And finally, throwing a swarm back into the hive it came out of will not work. They will be out again soon enough, and the more you put them back in, the more they will swarm again. I'm now going to cover some manipulations to help with swarming. You really do need to be able to find the queen if you wish to become a competent beekeeper, and this does come with experience. How are you at spotting queens? Can you see this one? This queen is unmarked, but it isn't too difficult to spot her amongst this group of workers. When the queen is marked, however, she is easily seen amongst a similar group of workers, and some beekeepers also give the queens a unique number so they know for certain who she is. Note also that this queen, number 55, has her left wings clipped. Where is the queen now? This is a congested modified Dayton's hive with very large frames, and unless the queen was marked, I think it would be virtually impossible to find her, and I don't think I'd try. So it is a good idea to mark your queens. I don't mark my queens until the following spring, as I have on several occasions had newly mated and marked queens balled and killed by the workers. It is easier to find the queens in the first spring inspections anyway, as there are less bees in the hive, none or not many drones to get in the way, and also with no drones the bees are unlikely to supersede her. Here are some tips to help you find the queen. Look for the queen specifically at the first inspection in spring, when there are less bees in the hive. Approach the hive quietly and use minimal smoke, as too much smoke will excite the bees, and the queen in particular will be running around the comb like mad, making her difficult to find. We want her quietly laying eggs on a frame of brood. Do not be distracted by anything else in the hive and concentrate solely on finding her. Even if you see queen cells, they can wait until the queen has been found and caged. She is probably going to be on a frame of brood, so don't waste time inspecting the first couple of frames if they only contain stores. The first or even first and second frames can be removed from the brood box and placed on the floor near the hive entrance or into a spare nuke box, as this will create space for you to work. A quick glance will do before moving on to the next frame. Examine the dark side of the frame first, as the queen always likes to run into the dark, and by this I mean the side of the frame furthest away from you as you are going through the hive. Be methodical in searching the frame. I look from top to bottom and go along the frame from left to right, methodically. You do whatever is good for you. Don't spend 10 minutes on each frame either, as that is likely to result in the queen running to the last frame in the hive, and then maybe onto the floor or side of the box where she is very difficult to find. A couple of minutes each side is sufficient. Keep the gap between the frames after you have examined them. That means pulling each frame back towards you, the first one tight against the hive wall and then each frame tight against each other, with no excess bee space except that created by the frame shoulders. By doing this, the queen is unlikely to cross the gap between the examined frames and those still to be checked. If you don't find her the first time through the frames, try a second time using the same method but in reverse. If she still can't be found, you can use paired frames. Place 4 lots of paired frames tight against each other but leave a couple of inches between each pair. Put the crown board back on and leave the hive alone for 10 minutes. When you return, the queen is likely to be in the dark between a pair of frames. As a last resort, you can use the wine method. Have you heard of this one? No? Well, you ask an experienced friend who's good at finding queens to find the queen for you, and you give them a bottle of wine as a thank you. I had a cellar full. You need to be able to recognize the different types of queen cells. These in this photograph are not queen cells. They are called queen cups or play cups, and the bees make them all the time just because they can. In the swarming season, however, they will make many more, and when they polish and coat the inside with propolis, it is only a matter of time before the queen lays an egg in them. When the egg hatches into a larva and the larva is fed royal jelly, it is then called a queen cell. Queen cells can be sealed or unsealed. On the bottom of these frames you can see 2 unsealed queen cells, the second and third along from the left, and 3 sealed queen cells. Here you can see an unsealed queen cell, first from the left with a larva inside being fed copious amounts of royal jelly. The other 2 cells in the top right of the photograph are empty and look like either old queen cells or old play cups. The first from the left is a sealed queen cell and the second one is unsealed. Sealed queen cells on the bottom of the frame, probably from a double brood box colony, are classic swarm cells, and in this instance the swarm has almost certainly left. These are emergency queen cells. They are made by the bees after the queen is lost, often killed accidentally by the beekeeper. The bees panic and start feeding larvae previously designed to become workers with royal jelly, and they will emerge as queens. Emergency queen cells are on the face of the comb and there are often many of them. Please note that the bees are not in swarming mode when they make these cells, so my advice would be to leave them alone to get on with it. Again, the emergency queen cells after the queen was lost. I must admit that this was one of mine. Now, have a look at these photographs and see if you can identify what type of cells there are. The answers will be on a slide later on. Number 1 and number 2. What do you see? Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. Here's number 6. What type of cell? Number 7. Number 8. Number 9, you can just about see that one. What would you do if you found this in your hive in August? Now, here's the answers to the quiz. Number 1. Number 1 is a queen cell from which a queen has previously emerged. You can see at the end where the lid would have opened and the queen would have come out, the lid's dropped off. Number 2 is a queen cup. Number 3 That's also a queen cup or an old queen cell. Number 4, a sealed queen cell, and it is a great grand swarm cell. You'd be happy to get a queen out of there, wouldn't you? Number 5, that's an emergency queen cell. Remember, the bees make that when they've lost the queen. There'll be lots of them. Number 6 is a supersedure queen cell. The bees are replacing the queen, and with supersedure cells there's normally between 1 and 5 queen cells on the face of the comb. A torn down queen cell from which the queen has been removed by the bees is number 7. You can see the hole in the side where the dead queen has been pulled out by the bees. They have either changed their mind and won't be swarming after all, or they have accepted an emergency queen and are getting rid of all the rest. Number 8 is an unsealed queen cell, and as it is on the bottom of the frame, it's probably a swarm cell. Number 9, you can just about see, is another queen cup. Now, what would you do if you found this in your hive in August? Well, this frame has one supersedure cell on it. As we said, the bees are replacing the queen. The best advice is to leave alone, especially if you see this in August, as if you keep knocking them down, it's going to be more and more difficult for a new queen to make going into autumn. Let's look at some general swarming tips. Have your spare equipment at the ready. Learn the swarming theory. Practice shaking bees off frames. Keep records so you know which colonies swarm. Rear some queens from your non-swarmy bees. That is the end of the session and the end of this series on swarming and swarm control. I hope that the practical tips will help you going forward and you'll become more confident and competent with your swarm control. But remember to also try out some swarm prevention techniques. We all have to learn, and the more you practice, the better you will become. I definitely learned lots of my beekeeping through the mistakes I made. If you are enjoying these videos, please subscribe below and click the like button. And consider buying me a virtual beer, which is more appropriate than coffee in the heat of Spain. Go to my buymeacoffee.com site where you'll find lots of bee-related articles, and the link is in the description below. Thank you to those who have already bought me a beer. I want to finish with a story about the great Professor Tom Seeley, who is the premier authority on bees as far as I'm concerned. He was coming to give a talk to one of the local beekeeping associations in Scotland and was staying with a friend of mine, Anne Chilcott. Anne knew I was a fan of his, so I was invited to join her and the professor for the pre-talk tea. I found him to be a very nice, polite gentleman, and he was far more interested in me than it appeared I was in him, as he asked me lots of questions about beekeeping in Scotland. We were sitting in front of a large log fire, and as I entertained him with interesting bee stories, I noticed his head starting to nod and his eyes starting to roll. He's pondering some of the most important points I've made, I told myself, but he never opened his eyes again. Well, yes, you've guessed it, I sent the top professor of apiculture to sleep talking about bees. So, congratulations if you stayed awake during these videos, you've outdone the professor. I would appreciate any comments or questions below and promise that I will reply to them all. That's all for now. Adios, amigos.